All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Hi, Sheila here, and I am with another episode of Spirit of Matter. And today I am with Astral Integrations. Chad, that's the name of the project, and it's Chad Washick. Am I pronouncing it right?
Yes, you are. Thank you.
Amazing. So I've met Chad on Twitter, and I saw that he kind of brings something different to the world of astrology, and I will soon let you kind of introduce yourself and say what would you most like to deliver today, because I know there's so much that you know. And yeah, so first, like, how did you get into astrology, and what made you do specifically what you do? Like, what do you like the most about what you're doing today?
Oh, well, so how I got into astrology is kind of an interesting story. I started out doing dream analysis, like Jungian psychology kind of stuff, but I really just kind of dabbled in that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody showed me my natal chart, and it like made me a believer in astrology, because I was like, oh, there's so much more than just my sun sign, right? And it just like made too much sense, and I began voraciously like learning and studying. That was about 11 years ago now, maybe 12, I can't remember exactly. And I'm a Scorpio deep down. That's my fourth house, so I'm very obsessive when I like, get into something, and I just learned more and more and more. And it was really just a hobby for a long time. I originally wanted to be a philosophy professor because I've always felt passionate about teaching, and I have a degree in philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
But I got very jaded with academia, and then everyone I was talking about astrology was like, you're really good at this, like you should do this. I was like, yeah, maybe I should teach astrology instead, right? And since then I've just been working on offering that to people, and I do have very innovative ideas, I think, in astrology, because I'm basically self-taught. I've read books, obviously, but I've always tried to come up with my own opinions and thoughts and like really kind of make sense of things myself. So I like to present something new and different. And I'm an Aquarius, Sun, and Venus, so I like to be different. I kind of pride myself on that a little bit, but
That's amazing. Well, I know for the Aquarius, you said Scorpio, fourth house in the Aquarius archetype. So I'm thinking this deep waters and air, kind of these yin yang of the intellectual abilities.
Yeah, I actually have a grand fixed cross in my chart on the angles. It's pretty intense. But my Pisces moon, I think, is my saving grace, because it connects with a lot of the other stuff, and it really, in my eighth house, it really allows me to go deep, and I kind of let the information come through me by letting go of myself.
I know also Pisces is something that can hold, that can unify opposites.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting. Like to see how it plays out in what you do and how you do it.
Yeah, one, I like that you brought up opposites, because oppositions are my favorite aspect in astrology, because they're different sides of the same coin. They are completing each other, and so when you work through the opposition, you create this balance. It's like an alchemy, right? And like that's why they're like the best aspect for me, because they really show you how to complete the circuit almost of expression.
Yeah, I mean, if I think to the core, like yin yang,
yeah,
that literally is literally two opposites, but they kind of nourish each other and they're inseparable. So I guess
exactly.
If one would see oppositions in the same way that they would have, I guess that's why they're easier than the squares.
Yeah, I like squares though too, personally, because squares challenge us to grow. When things are easy with like a trine, like you just take it for granted. And usually people that are the best at things have to put in the effort to be really good at those things. And if you're just like naturally good at something, like you don't put the effort into being your best. You don't have to work for it, right?
Yes, this trigger into action. That Marcy aspect.
Yeah, I have a lot of Capricorn placements too, so I'm very Saturnian in some ways. I like the work, the challenge.
That's great. Well, Capricorn for me is my 11th house. So every person with a stellium in Capricorn is very welcome in my life.
It makes sense we connected.
It makes sense we connected. That's correct.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I kind of get into, we kind of got into the aspects, but I'd like to ask you, you know, what do you really like about what you do, and kind of like what would you say your path or your contribution or the things you would most like to deliver into the astrology world?
So really what I want to do with astrology is empower people,
Mm-hmm.
because the reason I like called myself Astral Integrations on online spaces
Mm-hmm.
is because I really believe astrology is a tool for integrating all these different parts of ourselves so we can become more whole, right? When we can honor all these different parts of ourselves, we can fully express our purpose and what we're here to do, right? And really be aligned with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so astrology can be a tool for better understanding ourselves and also better understanding each other and how we interact with each other and what we have to offer one another, right? And I feel very passionate about teaching. I have Jupiter in my 10th house too, so
Mm-hmm.
that kind of makes sense. But I feel very passionate about teaching because I think, you know, I can make a big impact giving readings to people, but that's like small compared to if you give a person tools. If you give them the tools, you make such a larger difference. And
Mm-hmm.
I really just want to make the world a much better place. I'm very much that Aquarian humanitarian trope in a lot of ways. But also I feel very strongly too about working with families to help them better nurture and support their children growing up, because I am autistic and I really was very misunderstood and I wasn't given what I needed growing up because nobody understood me. So I was a late bloomer in a lot of ways and I struggled. But I don't think that has to be the case anymore if we, put more focus on helping children by understanding them through this lens of astrology, right? So that's something I'm very passionate about.
Wow, that is so interesting because I've actually ran into people who are not neurotypical in charts. What I saw like was something like harsh aspects or even in conjunction with the moon and Mercury. And I'm curious about like where would you see neurodivergence in charts?
Oh, this is a very interesting question because I've noticed some trends in studying charts. I know a lot of autistic
Mm-hmm.
people and other neurodivergent people, and Saturn aspects are definitely a big part of it because there's that feeling of inhibition or restriction, right? Chiron aspects actually are a big one too because there's this feeling of otherness or being kind of cast out like Chiron. And then also retrograde personal planets, because there's like a not ability to like translate that. So like retrograde Mars, Mercury, Venus, right? Like you're wanting to relate to people, but it's just not working for some reason, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like those are very common, but especially when there's hard aspects involving those things, that is more prevalent because, there's that tension of like wanting to relate in some
Mm-hmm.
way, but not being able to, or just not like clicking with how everything else is around you in the world.
It's interesting. And when you said, retrograde planets, then I think, because I have, let's say, Saturn opposition in my Sun and Venus, and I had like this in conjunction to Uranus from the Moon, but I was thinking about, my own Mercury that is stationing to be direct, and I got like a lot of the personal planets retrograde except for Venus. And when I think about communication, I never thought of I am neurodivergent in the sense that I have ADHD. But when you say communication or the ability to relate, it kind of clicks to me with sometimes being more able to relate in writing or in expression or in interviews or in public rather than one-on-one. That takes more
Yeah.
time. So yeah, I never thought about it. about the
Yeah.
because there's like excess energy when you have retrogrades, right?
Yeah, well, and like for me, like a retrograde is when the energy is turned inward, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
Venus, you're like, I want to connect with people. I want to relate to them, my values and what I love, and share, this connection with them. But like for some reason, it's not working when I try to express it outwardly. But like inwardly, I know what I'm trying to, and I just can't translate that. I can't like direct it outward in the way that works, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like that's like kind of thing about retrograde planets in general, but especially the personal planets, which for me are the sun through Mars. Of course, the sun and the moon don't go retrograde, but the other planets, because those are more about how we connect in a personal sense, right? And want to show who we are to people in a more personal sense, right?
Right. And when you say, you know, allow parents to nourish people, because there's so many neurodivergent people, it's like, and I ran into the word neurodivergent when I first got on Twitter, because in my country, people just like either call it autistic spectrum, and like instead of saying mental diseases, they say like soul sensitive or something like that. And then I ran into neurodivergence, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is genius.
Yeah.
um,
No, one, there's so many ways people can be neurodivergent, and it's also like kind of countering this idea of like neuronormacy, or
mhm.
like this is what a normal person is like, right? And there's so many people that aren't normal, because what is normal? You have to have this like standard of normal, right? So being able to understand people in the different unique ways that they are is like so important. um,
It is so
and I
validating.
Yeah, and the thing is too, like everybody's so unique. Like there's nobody alive that has the same birth chart as you. Like things aren't gonna align the same way. You're gonna have different experiences in your life. Like even for twins, like I've had clients that have been twins in the past, right?
Mhm.
And I can see that they have different experiences, like even in their charts, but like in their lives too. Like if they live somewhere different, they're having different experiences, so it shapes them in different ways, right? So everybody's different and unique in their own way. We just have to be able to kind of try to understand each other and where we're coming from, right? That's like the key, though, is like the empathy. And hetero nor or sorry, I guess like the culture of normalcy
Mhm.
is not about like empathy. It's like trying to put people in a box, and that just doesn't work, especially nowadays.
Yes, I think as we grow, you know, more and more society, we realize that more and more people want to have the place in the world, and not just be a part of a certain system or a certain structure. Um, that can be challenging for many of the structures that we have. I mean, we now have on and off this Uranus square Saturn in the heavens, kind of leading us to have this quarrel between, you know, the individual and the structures and the societal structures and the hierarchies. Um, and I guess there is an inner calling for acknowledgement and self-acceptance, kind of the journey from a communal society or a tribal society into a society that is both tribal. There are a lot of tribes, and you know, especially in marketing, people talk about build your tribe, build your community, but also a lot of individuation and the
Hmm.
necessity. It's a very, you know, I know it's a cliche to talk about Uranian, like Aquarius age, but this very specific archetype of a community of individuals.
Yeah, I mean, I love that kind of thing too, because like I'm so Aquarius, and I'm a big believer that everybody's got a gift that they're meant to give
Mm-hmm.
in this life that can make the world a better place. And
Mm-hmm.
it's just about supporting people and giving them the space. And astrology is a way of understanding our gifts and
Mm-hmm.
really understanding what that is that we're here to share, right? And it's about finding our own truth and
Mm-hmm.
connecting with that, and then being able to share that with other people, right? So it's like we have to focus on our individual selves and really getting serious about like, who am I, like authentically, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then when we come from that authentic place, when we find that truth that Uranus is like asking us to find,
Yeah.
then we can like really show up in society and be like, hey, this is my truth, here's what I have to offer, like. And for the people that are on this like same wavelength, like I have this for you. And not everyone's gonna mesh, but
Mm-hmm.
together collectively we can make things better if we focus more on supporting one another and working towards a common goal and a common good. And really right now the earth is at a tipping point with climate change, with all these other issues, right? And the way that we make things better is by working together. And I'm a big believer that humanity's greatest strength is our ability to collaborate and innovate. And if we support each other in that, then we can find solutions to these problems. You know, we don't have the technology right now to solve some of the problems we have, right? But it doesn't mean we can't have those things, right? Especially when we work together. But we have to put the spirit of working together and supporting individuals first, because, you know, as an individual, if you're not supported, you don't want to work towards or contribute to some greater good, because you're like, the collective doesn't take care of me. I don't have what I need. And that's really what the square between Uranus and Taurus and Saturn and Aquarius has like really been showing us. Like, I am not having my needs met by society. I can't express my truth. I don't have what I need. Like, something needs to change. And we need to, you know, work towards that change together, but also as individuals. Like, what can I do to have what I need to offer my gifts, right? But yeah, that's my spiel on that.
Yeah, I mean, that is so true, because it's literally like a war between the two rulers of Aquarius.
Yeah,
It's like
Saturn and Uranus.
an inner Aquarius conflict. That's literally what it is. You know, and yeah, now Saturn is also it's in Aquarius already. So it's very interesting. I don't know what will be. There are all the, you know, the news of the predictions of the astral world that range from Third World War to utopia. And those very diverse paradigms are kind of, they're really diverse. And just like people actually in the spiritual community talk about splitting of the world. You can actually see that. It's like, I don't know if I want to look, but it's there. And so the voice, the uniqueness of the voice that you're bringing in is the voice of Uranus, I think. It's the voice of, let's be together, but in an authentic way. And let's let people shine. And I'm curious about, really, what would you tell a family, let's say that the child is neurodivergent, because people might be watching this, and there are so many people who deal with that, or deal with having children who are neurodivergent. I know it's a very generic thing, because there is a birth chart and every person has their own needs, and no two people are the same type. That's the whole point about being neurodivergent. But is there like a general thing you could say to somebody watching this?
I would just say, have patience and understanding, you know, like, try to, with, you know, beyond just your children, just try to like really put yourself in their shoes, try to understand them. You know, patience gets us a lot further. And I think that's actually kind of one thing that's really problematic in the world today, is everything is so busy. There's so many demands in the world that we don't have the time to really tend to things and take care of things that we need to. So, you know, children are neglected. We don't have the patience with them. You know, even like our lifestyle choices, people don't cook enough food at home. They're, you know, eating out all the time because they can't slow down. They can't really take that time. Families don't spend time together even, you know, and that's like a problem too, especially, you know, when, you know, understanding what your children need, right? So just taking time to slow down and like create that space for one another, especially the people in our life in the most immediate way that we care about. That's so important, but especially for a neurodivergent child.
Yeah. Yeah, when I think about, you know, in essence, not all, but many of neurodivergent people, communication and relation is an issue. So that, like, to actually feel seen or validated is something that does not come easily. So that's kind of like, they really need the extra mile to feel seen.
Yeah, and that support is so meaningful. Like, that was a lot of my problem, like, growing up, because no one listened to me. Nobody heard me. There's like, you have behavioral issues, this and that, you know, and I wasn't diagnosed till I was like 15 because, you know, they weren't as aware of autism at the time. And I'm really smart. So it's like, well, you know, he can do all these other things, but he's struggling in the way he interacts with people, right? So like, what is it? But, you know, it's because they didn't take the time to listen to me or hear me. And that's usually what neurodivergent people need, but especially children. Children in general just need to feel like they're supported and heard. That goes such a long way, right? And that patience is the key, you know, taking the time to be like, what are you saying to me? Like, what is it that you need? Like, it's almost like just holding space for them, for their feelings, for what they're going through, for their experiences, right?
Yeah, that's I think, you know, I'm humbled by people being, I don't have children, so I'm humbled by people being parents in this world, because there seems to be a huge loop. I'm also a holistic health practitioner, so I know very well, both from my own life experience and from the experiences of people, how stressing out. I know America is kind of transitioning from the hustle culture into wellness culture, and that's something so blessed. Yet this transition is not like that. It's it's a process. And I know so much about how this hustle thingy results in people spending the money that they earn, that they think they need for survival. It goes out on medications, it goes out on addictions, and it never actually absorbs, because you need that illness to absorb even the money that you get.
Yeah.
And that's it, and it's a strange loop, because it does seem helpless when a person is, you know, working 2-3 jobs and afraid to lose them and wanting to raise the children. So this is real struggle. This is like the Saturnian stuff.
Yeah, it's harsh, like the way society is set up. You know, there's so many people that aren't having their needs met and they're struggling to survive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes, you know, people just find ways to cope, and they're not healthy ways to cope, or they find ways to make their life a little bit easier, but it's not necessarily the best thing for them. And it's because of this imbalance, right? There's so much emphasis on having to grind and work to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, we live in a time that we have more technology and, like, you know, knowledge to make life easier for everybody. So like life shouldn't be this hard for all of us, but there's an imbalance and there's a need for systematic change. And that's really what Pluto and Capricorn is highlighting.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the system's broken. The way things are is not working. It's killing us, literally,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And that became very apparent too this last year with, you know, the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's very interesting that that happened like right after the Saturn, Jupiter, Pluto conjunction, right? It was like, hey, like, really, like, this isn't working. Like, people aren't getting what they need, like, by and large. You know, maybe the people at the very top, they have more than they need, right? And that's like why there's an imbalance.
Mm-hmm.
And so there needs to be a way to better take care of individuals in society. And, you know, the more you invest in everyday people, you know, normal people, you know, everywhere in the world, the more they can contribute. It's like a really kind of, I guess, crazy idea by, you know, society standards today. But if you take care of people, they're able to do more to make things better.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want to build that world. And I'm like here to be a champion of that, I guess.
I got a big question, a very big question, because I'm thinking, you know, part of my channel is like my cosmology, and I'm thinking of things in terms of temperature, velocity, density, frequency, and their direction, like the yin and yang. And I'm thinking that there is this, when we talk about structure and we talk about density, something very dense, like hierarchy or survivalistic mechanism. And then we talk about communication, about giving space, which is literally, you know, space. That's yin. That's and we actually don't need a lot of yang, a lot of dense things, to be equal to yin, to have balance. Even if I take a look at the human body, okay, we got the very brain, which is more dense. We got the heart. We got the liver. But most of our body is not so dense, and it's balanced. It can be very healthy. We have 70% water, so there's a lot of yin. But if you take, you know, one, you know, dense matter and you compare it with non-dense matter, it looks like the non-dense matter is a lot greater while they're in fact equal. And I'm getting to think that this yin yang imbalance in the world, like people on a personal level, people believe they need more yang than they actually need. But then I think about this from, you know, above so below. So what's the cosmology of it? Like what would be the cosmology? Is it an alchemy that we need to do to the cosmic order? Or is it the cosmic order that is changing and allowing for us to transition into this society that you speak about, that is actually more balanced and take care of the community needs, and allows for individuals to exist within it?
Well, I think of things in terms of a pendulum,
Mm-hmm.
right? So sometimes it goes too far one way, and then it has to swing back the other way. So we went too far this one way, and you know, it's the system that, you know, our world nowadays is built upon.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, since it's gone too far, people are really seeing that it's not working, and then it's creating this pushback in the other direction. So we're going back more towards the middle, and you know, maybe at some point it'll go too far the other way, then it'll do a swing back, but who knows when that is. But we definitely need to move in a different direction than we have been, for the sake of everyone. You know, like I brought up how, you know, the climate or the planet's in dire need of being taken care of, and like, you know, fixing these problems that we've created. If we keep going down the same path, then life's just going to not exist on Earth as we know it. There will be no humans. I don't know what will survive, right? We could just be like another example of Venus, where there's too many greenhouse gases and, you know, nothing can live there. And that would be really tragic. That'd be very sad. And I'm a big believer, though, that we can find balance. It's just that we have to make a concerted effort. And the way we do that is supporting each other and sharing ideas and connecting with one another, right? Showing each other that there's another way and supporting each other in that, and really pushing for those things together. And, you know, the thing is, we have power together. You know,
Mm-hmm.
collectively change can happen in meaningful ways. By ourselves, we can't do very much. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I can only do so much as a single person. But if I unite people, if I get them to collaborate with me and work towards a common good, then we can, you know, change things so that our needs are met. So we're getting what we need, and we can, you know, also provide for the planet and the future. You know, like I would love for, you know, there to be generations after us that can enjoy the world in a much better state than we've had it, right? And, you know, made it. So, you know, I think we can make it better. It's just about shifting our perspective. And I kind of feel like it's also kind of why I'm excited about Uranus and Taurus, because the last time Uranus was in Taurus was the Great Depression, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big shakeup. But I believe Pluto was in Gemini at the time. And so, like, it really didn't lead to meaningful change. It was kind of a lot of propaganda that came out that led us into like World War II and like all these other things, right, in the world. And, you know, people were kind of fooled at what the real problem is, because, you know, the power of propaganda in the media with Pluto and Gemini at that time. But now, like with Pluto and Capricorn, with Uranus and Taurus, it's like, wait, things are really not working. Like, this is not sustainable. Like, we need to change things. And people see that. I talk to so many people that are like, yeah, this is not working, especially younger people, right? Because like a lot of us have grown up and we were sold on this idea that we'd have opportunities, or that, you know, like we'd be able to do certain things. And we haven't had those opportunities. I know so many people with worthless college degrees, they can't get a job. It's like, oh, you got to get a master's or a PhD, and you're so much in debt, or like, you know, whatever it is, or you can buy a home. I can't even imagine buying a home in America at this rate.
Same here, you know, I'm 37. Okay, my lifestyle is a bit different than most people, but I'm 37. Many people my age, many people who have families, and so they still live in rent. Like, I don't,
Mm-hmm.
it is so much so. For me, it's like the idea of buying a home and all the bureaucracy and all that thing. I'm like, woof, leave me alone. But even for people who want their apartment, it's like, it's so much so that many people are like not even dreaming about it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like we can't have these fundamental things that we need. Like, you know, shelter is just like a human need, right? and to know that you're solid. Like there's so many people in America right now that are on the verge of being evicted because they couldn't pay their rent because of the pandemic or whatever it is. And you know, we've never lived in a time that there's been so many homeless people, for instance. So clearly there's a systematic failure, and we need to demand change and that things be done better. And you know, we need governments to go along with these changes too, because I think that's part of the problem. You know, these old guard governments, these people from, you know, these past generations have enriched themselves, and they, you know, in a lot of senses, all these governments are corrupt. Like every government in the world is corrupt, and they're killing their citizens. They're killing the people of the world, and we, as the people and the citizens of these countries, need to demand change, right? Like I think we all want to live in a world where we can prosper and thrive, but that's not what we're given right now. We're not given those opportunities. And so things need to change. And that's what Uranus and Taurus is like, hey, saying like, you don't have what you need, like do something about it, right?
You know what I was thinking? You were stating the difference between the placements of Pluto, which I think is a huge thing. And I know United States will be entering their Pluto return in 2022. Which I watch cautiously. I mean, Uranus is probably shaking up the sun of my own country. It's conjuncting my personal sun, but it's going to be conjuncting my country's sun. That's something. But the Pluto return is kind of like, you know, sort of like the whole probably astrological community is kind of observing what's going to happen there.
Yes, I mean, I'm here, so I'm like, I'm very much wondering how it's going to shake out. I know it's going to be for the better in the long term, because it's, you know, Pluto is about death and rebirth. So the old America has to die so a new America can be born that will, you know, be better suited to like what we need, right? To continue like as a country, right? But we have to, you know, take a hard look at what needs to change. And that's really what's been going on the last few years, because, you know, before a return happens, like any kind of return, you really start to feel it shift into place, like in, you know, the time leading up to it. With a Pluto return, you feel it, you know, years beforehand. Like, and we've seen it, you know, especially the last like 4 or 5 years in America, like how many things are not working. And this is going to be like a moment like, yes, okay, like we have to confront it. And now what do we do? So I'm hoping for the best. I know it's going to be intense. There's going to be a lot of things that really come out that need to be dealt with, but that's the only way forward, right? You got to confront things to move forward. And that kind of goes to, you know, Mars being like the other ruler of Scorpio, right? It's both those energies together that like really allow you to transform and work through things. And I'm a Pluto in Scorpio, so that's
yeah, I'm also I'm the 0 degree Pluto in Scorpio, the retrograde. So yeah. But yeah, I think this brings up so much, because I just think about the simple thing, you know, we had a T-square and with Venus there, and I was like, at the beginning, you know, of July, and I was like, I don't like this Venus there. I don't like this Venus there. She dries out. I don't like this placement. I don't like it. I don't like it. And then, you know, on that week, the astrology community was like booming with Venus, Mars stuff. And I was like, yeah, I was like, oh, maybe I was wrong about that. And then, you know, everybody were happy in a Venus Marsy way and excited about it, and Leo, you know, shines and sparks and whatnot. And then the next day, just a friend of mine was like, have you heard about the burnings in California? I'm like, you what? Because none of my astrologer friends mentioned, they were all busy doing something else. And I was thinking of how on a mundane level, because we're all are alchemists in some way, even people who don't do that astro magic, we're all of some sort of alchemy within us. So we kind of had a good time this week, while the United States was literally half side floating, half side burning. And that's like the mundane level. And so when I think about, you know, something as huge as a Pluto return, I'm like, there's the interpersonal, the personal thingy, and then there's, you know, I cannot ignore that when something acts on a mundane level, there's just fated events
Yeah.
on a grand scale,
Yeah.
of the
I
full
mean,
nature.
I think like a very recent example was the building collapse in Miami,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that's like literally infrastructure being so poor that it killed people, like, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's nothing they would have known about or could really have done anything about unless they were building inspectors. They wouldn't live there,
Mm-hmm.
right? But it shows that our infrastructure is crumbling. And in America's chart, Pluto is in their second house, right, of America. And so like literally it's like people don't have the resources they need. Like this country has like taking all the resources that we need to support the people of this country and giving it to the few, right? And like we're really coming to see the issues with it. And like actually recently America pulled out of Afghanistan, right, or is pulling out of Afghanistan,
Mm-hmm.
and I think they spent like $3 trillion on that war.
Mm-hmm.
And it literally just lined the pockets of these contractors, like these rich people, like with their companies or government officials, basically. And for what? It did nothing but like make more radicalized people in Afghanistan
Mm-hmm.
and destroy their country. And so we're misusing our resources. We're not using our resources for the right thing, and like something needs to change because we have all the resources to have a green infrastructure,
Mm-hmm.
to take care of people, to have universal health care. Like it's kind of ridiculous that the richest nation in the world doesn't have universal health care. Like what is
Well,
this?
this relates to, if I think back to when America was founded, basically, and the values upon which it was found. Then, as far as I was taught, it was another step towards individuation. And when I say capitalism, I don't mean capitalism in the corporate. Corporate is not capitalism. Capitalism was literally then the understanding that if you make the ground fertile, you should be reaping the fruits. So the very idea that people, of course, then there was slavery, yeah, but the concept was that people are individuals and they should have liberty. They should have liberty to carry weapons so that no government can control them. And so the idea that the country will take tax from people, which is what we need to take care of people, would be giving power to the state that is too much. That is not why America was founded. And now we're kind of going, back on a circle into which America deals with people wanting support, people needing government support, even more so than there was in the Depression.
Yeah. One, I think this idea of rugged individualism is just taken too far, because that's really like what has made America so much like this.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it's okay to like be individuals, right? Like that should be encouraged. Like I very
Mm-hmm.
much encourage people to be themselves and to really express themselves, but it can't be at the cost of other people. And that's like the problem with going too far to one side. And the thing is, the government's supposed to be there to protect people and have limited power, but instead what the government does is they protect corporations and these vested interests, which are the interests of rich people,
Mm-hmm.
and just like doesn't care anything about their average citizen. Like they literally do nothing to protect them or empower them. They disempower them as much as they can. And there's this study I think I read on Twitter that came out yesterday. Somebody was sharing an article, I think it might have been like Dan Price, that the people in America, if they're working a minimum wage job full time, they can't afford to rent a place. Like you can't even afford to rent a place working full time
Mm-hmm.
in America at minimum wage. And yet
Mm-hmm.
we're expected to live here. And like that's not even counting whatever other costs we have, right? Like really, like I mean maybe it is, I didn't read the whole thing, but there's so many extra costs, and this is everywhere in America. You could live in the most rural, cheap cost of living
Mm-hmm.
area in America, and minimum wage will not,
Wow.
give you what you need.
I
So
think it was not always like that. Because I know when America was founded, yeah, it was very difficult to get by, and people would make, I don't know, $1, and they would not have a place to live. But then there were years in America where I know this from my country because my mama lived in America for a couple, a short while, but she remembered like how food was cheap and rent was something you could live with, and the living costs in America were like, if you live in an American with an American salary, you can live the good life. That's how we looked at it from our country, which is like everything has gotten expensive, also the living cost and also the food cost. We would laugh at our country that this is so small that in America it's cheaper to buy food. And now you said that's changed too, that like now nobody can live even in the most remote area a good lifestyle if they
yeah,
make
I mean, if you're
money.
making more than minimum wage, like if you're making a lot of money, America is
Mhm.
fine, right? But that's not most people, and that's the issue. And it's really inflation. S- Wages have stagnated for a long
Yeah.
time, like, and at the same time, everything has gone up so exponentially. Like, even
Mhm.
like college, for instance, like I can't even believe how much more expensive it is than when my parents went to college and got their degrees.
Oh,
Like my mom was like, I worked like part time when I was in school and I paid for my whole college degree. And I'm like,
mhm.
I wish I could work part time and pay for a college degree. Like that's absurd here, like in the present day America.
Yeah,
Um,
and there's a big issue with the academia because I see, academia, it's ninth house. It's not an equal power relationship in essence. And when you study, then your scholarship makes you your living. So your studies is your living, is the house where you live, is the people that you date, is the people you become friends with, is the people you depend on to finish the degree. And so there is a huge dependency that just by going to school, you become so hugely dependent that when you need to break it out, it's almost like going from out of a violent relationship. Like it's
yeah,
so
well,
intense.
yeah, and I think there's a huge problem too. Like there's such a push to like have all these 18-year-old kids right out of high school go to
Mm-hmm.
college, 4-year degrees, and they get all these loans, like hundreds of thousands of dollars in loans at sometimes, right, to get their degree. And so they get out of school and they're so in debt, and then they can't even find a job with their bachelor's degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they take whatever jobs they can get just to try to, you know, deal with their debt. And they never have a chance to get ahead. Or they go back to school and acquire even more debt,
Mm-hmm.
like getting a master's or a PhD to, maybe get a good paying job, hopefully, depending on what field they're in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, it is a big issue. And like, there's just so many things that are systematically wrong that need to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's become very apparent as of late. I mean, it's been probably apparent for a long time, but like, especially now with America's Pluto return coming up and that being in the second house, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping for the better. I'm hoping that, like, we all collectively see like, hey, this is not working, and like, let's change it, right? But
And
who
and
knows how it's going to play out?
yeah, and,
That's
and
like
the
the thing.
solutions when I think about, Uranus is technology. Even, we can take it to after Second World War, which was horror. Two generations of men died, then women got the right to vote. But not because men were oppressing them so much so as just the power relations have shifted. Because I believe that before the Second World War, if a woman would say, "Oh, I want to vote for this and that," and should try to get women to gather up and demonstrate, and they would be like, "I think we will, skip it." But then the power relationship really shifted, and then we had, the way our currency changed.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
I mean, the technology thing is, yeah, a good point, because I think the real game changer has been the internet.
mhm.
Not that it's not censored and controlled in some ways by, these tech companies, but it allows us to more freely exchange information and talk with one another. It used to be
Mhm.
the only way to exchange information, like long distance was through the media, which, you know, had these like corporate interests that backed them, right? But now we can organize and share our stories with each other so freely and effortlessly online that it really gives us the power to connect, to like really see, you know, the actual narrative rather than this propaganda that is fed to us, right? Or has been fed to us in the past, right? So it allows us to see like, whoa, like things are actually not right. Like, and I didn't realize this before. We could connect and talk and like really share these things. And, you know, everybody's got a camera now with their phone, right? They're like, oh, something's going down. Like, I need to share this to the internet. I need to show this to people. I'm going to record it, right? Like with police brutality, like for instance, like it, you know, people have known about it for years, but like we haven't had the technology to make it so easy to share with everyone, to like really highlight how big of a problem it is. And so technology can be a great blessing to us, like in like changing these things and giving us the power to like really see what needs to be addressed. It can also be a curse, though. It's a double-edged sword, like any of the, you know, air signs, you know, got both sides. And, you know, it can be used to control us, you know, like we create echo chambers online where it just reinforces and radicalizes people, right? And so that's like, you know, the danger of it. But if we use technology in the right way, if we use this tool in the right way, we can, you know, have a positive impact, create change for the better. And I think it's going to be very interesting when Pluto goes into Aquarius and seeing how that plays out, especially because Uranus is going to be in Gemini not too long after that, and seeing how those two kind of interplay when we're, you know, dealing with air instead of earth, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, when Pluto, yeah, where was Pluto in the last time Uranus was in Gemini? I don't remember. Was it already in Cancer? It was. Yeah,
I
it
think
was.
so.
It was
Yeah, yeah,
like the Second World War. It was already in Cancer.
yeah. Cancer was the World War, so yeah, that makes sense. So,
Yeah.
but it'll be much different with, you know, them being trying one another at some
Wow.
point.
Oh my gosh, you know, I go back to, you know, I did politics and governance and the English linguistics on the first degree. In the second degree, politics and governance. I didn't finish my second degree. So I think back to all the things that I've learned, and I think astrologically, and I'm like, the motherland, Heimat, the family. Think about, you know, the Nazis and the family and the thinking about the state as a body or as a family. You know, the
Yeah, that
body
makes
part is
sense.
more Uranus, but the family thingy, what all that we think Cancer is, and then kind of seeing the shadow of the tribe, the shadow of the family, the shadow of the motherland, kind of just
Hmm.
like vomiting into. And now we're going to have Pluto in an air sign in Aquarius, which is like the spaciest. And I'm kind of like, okay, what's the shadow? Because that's what we're going to see with,
Yeah,
with, with Uranus and Gemini, booming technology and currency completely transforming. So Aquarius is it could actually be cults, I think.
yeah, it definitely can be. And, you know, there's like a dangerous trend already, like with authoritative governments and the way they use technology and
Mm-hmm.
how these technologies can be used to censor or control people in certain ways. And, you know, there's a real dark side to technology. And, you know, that's going to become very apparent during Pluto in Aquarius.
Mm-hmm.
But especially with America, I think it's about learning how we can transform the way we interact with technology, because sometimes like, and because it's going to be in the third house in the American chart, right? So it's a
Mm-hmm.
lot about learning, right? And, you know, it's a transformation wherever Pluto is, like through facing that shadow, through really looking at those things. And
Mm-hmm.
technology, like if we have the right relationship with it, can be, you know, so helpful in our life. But the problem is, like right now, we're so out of balance with the way we interact with technology. I mean, social media, for instance, is designed to like get us addicted, to loop us
Mm-hmm.
in, to create these echo chambers, right? That's not healthy. Like we're not using it to enhance our life. it's like captivating us almost, like taking us prisoner from our life, from, you know, our real lived experience. It can be a great cool tool to connect and talk with people and share things, right? But just the way it's set up is not working, right? So how can we change that? How can we use these technologies? How can we use our innovative human spirit to make things better, rather than use them to control each other, or to, you know, enrich people, or, you know, give more power to, you know, these entities that are very Saturnian, right? You know, the other side of Aquarius, right?
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting, to say the least, especially if Uranus, though, being in Gemini for part of that.
Yeah, I'm trying to say, you know, what will be. I think I feel for the children who will be born in, and I feel for the children who are born in Pluto in Capricorn. I would definitely feel for the children who will be born with Pluto in Aquarius. Though we are Pluto in Scorpios, we should feel for ourselves.
I mean, every generation's got a hard time with their Pluto, you know, Pluto placements, but I love Pluto. Pluto is actually my favorite planet. I mean, I know this is not a popular opinion, but Pluto is the most misunderstood, right? Because, you know, our fear is our shadow. You know, in some ways, it's our trauma, right? And we give our power away to those things, and we don't want to look at them. We don't want to face them, and that's why they're our shadow. We push them away. But there is such power to be reclaimed in, like, really, you know, integrating that and seeing that and facing that. And the way we can make a positive impact on the world is by owning our shadow. And so everybody that makes history and, you know, really has a profound impact on the world does so from a place of their Pluto. They either do it in a very negative way, where they're not owning their Pluto, right? Like, you know, a lot of people in our governments, or, you know, they can do it in a really profoundly positive and transformative way because they did their shadow work. And, you know, the generations that have these, you know, these Pluto placements, they tell you what their power is and what they're here to do. So our generation, Pluto in Scorpio, is here to transform emotionally, you know, the collective, and be like, whoa, hey, like, we need to go deep and see what's not working. We need to face our fears. We're not getting what we need emotionally, and, like, something needs to change, right? And it's about creating more intimacy with one another and how we connect with the world, right? And then, you know, like, the Pluto and Capricorn generation, which, since you brought them up, they're here to build things and, like, create infrastructure that's going to be very transformative to, like, really, you know, create a foundation for a better world. And then the Pluto and Aquarius generation, they're here to, like, really realize that vision, because Aquarius is the visionary, right? They're, like, have this clear sense of, like, the future and how to, you know, make something that will benefit all mankind, right? But they're not growing up in a time or being born in a time when that is the case, right? And the thing with Pluto, especially since it is, you know, such a long orbit, those things take time to, like, really start to come to fruition, right? So it's not until around our Saturn return that we really start to come into our Pluto power, right? And so, like, then we start to see the effect of that generation, you know, a couple generations down the line, like, what that, you know, time really grew into, right? Because when you plant a seed, it's not like immediately it grows into a tree, right? Or it takes time. And so, like, you don't see the effects of a Pluto generation until a couple of generations later. And that's usually with the sextile. The sextile is where you start to see that initial growth. And then the square is like, oh no, like, things aren't quite working. We need to kind of push and work a little harder to get what we need. So, like, right now we're in the square with the Libra generation, right? And they're like, we want to, you know, create a sense of connection that's really meaningful, right? And things are just not quite working. So, like, how do we push for that? And with Pluto and Aquarius, they're gonna have their trying, and it's gonna be like, okay, like, cool, we worked through that tension. Now we can, like, start to focus on, like, you know, the future of how we connect and relate to one another, and, like, how we can, you know, take care of one another on a community and societal level better. Because things aren't working right now. But yeah, I love Pluto. I could talk about Pluto all day.
Well, you know, I know you do also evolutionary. astrology.
Mhm.
So of course you could talk about Pluto all day. This is like oh, here is a question. Because I was thinking evolutionary, we look naturally at Pluto, the
Mhm.
the soul, of course, at the ascendant. For those who look at North Node and Keto, Rahu and Keto. And I was thinking about Jupiter. Because Jupiter to me is what facilitates that transformation. Also, when I think about, what do I do in my praxis? If a patient comes to me with a trauma, I don't push him with, I don't know, ketones, which is like something that brings up trauma or something like that. I try to give him like something that will calm the nervous system, create joy, create kind of space where they can slowly, slowly land into their bodies. And then whatever wants to come up will come up. And I think that Jupiter, in a good aspect, can kind of facilitate that path of going from, Pluto being, I'm your bag of trauma, please love me. And you go, to actually learning how to slowly allow for that bag of trauma to exist beside you, within you, and slowly dissipate. And I think I have not seen a good discourse about Jupiter in evolutionary.
Oh, well, I love Jupiter. So, I mean, Jupiter, creates the space, it creates opportunities, right, to grow. And, evolutionary astrology is all about, seeing and understanding how we grow over our lifetime. So, yeah, of course, Jupiter is definitely a big part of that. And, I guess I don't keep up too much with like what other evolutionary astrologers like think or say on the topic, but, every part of our chart is important. They're all parts of ourselves that are growing and evolving, through the years and through these cycles, that they're completing, right? And Jupiter is, that planet that really allows us to have those opportunities, because if you never had an opportunity to, have the space to grow, then like you would never grow. It just wouldn't happen, like if everything was Saturnian, it'd just be too heavy. Just like, I can't, I'm being crushed.
Yeah,
the weight.
we see a lot of Saturnian cases in my training, because everybody comes with stress and or anxiety, and these are contraction states. These are state of the system is cool, and what you need is to warm up the system to create space. So the Saturnian, a lot of people say, for example, to people who heal from trauma, heal from addiction even, they say, take responsibility over your life. And I'm like, you take a person in a contracted state of the body, cool state, anxiety state, overactive nervous system, and you put more Saturn in. No, put a bit Jupiter. Put a little bit of Jupiter. Also in the oils, also in the crystals, also in whatever praxis method the person does, kind of put some curiosity there.
Yeah, I mean, I have Pluto right on my IC, and it's directly opposite my Mars on my midheaven, and square my Sun and my rising. So I definitely know a lot about working with Pluto. And the thing was, like, at a certain point, like, I told myself, like, well, what if I just tried to deal with things differently? And that's like the Jupiter, like, just open a new door, like, don't keep going down the same path. And obviously I need to deal with this at some point, but maybe I just need to create the space to deal with it, right? And that's also like what I want to do, like with the work I do, is help people create the space for themselves. People deal with things when they're ready, they have the space to. And my job as an astrologer is just to facilitate, whatever they need to find in those moments in their life. I give them tools, I give them the ability to open up to what they need. And I think maybe because my moon's in Pisces, people have an easier time opening up to me. It's kind of just like flows out of people a lot of times. But, it's so important to create that space and to just, if something's not working, try something new. Don't keep beating a dead horse expecting it to come back to life. Like, oh, I figured it out.
Yeah, this is amazing. This is amazing. First of all, I completely agree with you on a medical level, on a healing level, on a consultation level. I really agree with that approach. Um, because there's the place where you validate the client and you can say, oh, I can see in your chart that so and so and so and so could definitely result in what you described in theory that you've went through, and that can be very validating for people, especially if they are not sure or blaming themselves for what happened to them, or don't know if they're imagining, like people who went through abuse or whatever. So you can validate their reality, which is really important. But then the beauty of your journey is that you've dealt with those Pluto stuff. You have a bunch of them.
Yeah,
So Pluto
a lot of
opposition
it.
Mars on the ICMC, that's a bunch of stuff, and you found that place where when you say, give space for something and it will come up, and don't push to deal with stuff, but actually make space. Aside of that being genius for you to deal with that, and it's not a given that you would do that. Like, it's not a given that you will be able to reach that level of basically genius to deal with trauma, because we don't have practices that are good at that. We did not grow up in practices that know how to deal with trauma. The whole CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, was actually discovered like a couple of years ago, and it was not even fully integrated into the DSM. So we did not grow up knowing how to treat these things. And you're coming up with this and coming up with the notion that you make space for things to grow, and then they do,
Yeah.
uh, which I think is magnificent for anybody who would come to you for a reading. The date be handled with care by a person who went through this growth himself and knows
Yeah.
what he's talking about, and knows that it's work. Because it sounds to people, when we talk Jupiter, a lot of people are looking for that concrete stuff, and they think that's Saturnian and that's the healing. But Jupiter is very concrete. The
Hmm.
space is very concrete. Curiosity is very concrete. And this works in praxis. This is not beautiful ideas, spiritual woo-woo. To make the space works in praxis when you need to heal those Pluto stuff or those Saturn stuff.
Yeah.
And I've seen it in my life as well. So that's something amazing that you bring to this course. This both being, healing oriented and an astrologer.
Well, and I think, too, the most powerful experiences we can bring to the table are, coming from a place of being able to relate to our own experiences, right?
I
So
think I
if I
can
can,
see half of your face. So I just,
uh,
yeah. Oh, great. Yeah.
sorry. Um, so I think part of it too, is being able to relate our own experiences to people, to like help them understand, like, I've been through this, like I understand, like, or just like when you're talking with people, like reflecting on like what, is something that, gave me the space to grow, because
Hmm.
I had to heal myself before
Hmm.
I could help other people, right? And so learning from those experiences, I can then facilitate using the knowledge to help them in their journey, right? um, and Chiron, I think, is probably also part of it in my chart. It's actually trine my north node,
Hmm.
um, like pretty perfectly. And my north node is conjunct Pallas Athene. I don't know if you work with Pallas Athene, but I
Well,
like her
she's
a lot.
on my first house. It's squaring Uranus in my 10th. I've heard Dimitra George talks about the asteroids, and she talks about Pallas Athena. She was mentioning basically the balance between the feminine and masculine aspects of this archetype, and the need for approval from a fatherly figure. That's what I remembered. I know this probably being very redundant, because I'm summarizing something that she summarized for the cast. So that's probably extremely redundant. But I could definitely see it play out in my life. Like, how did she play in your life?
Well, so Pallas Athene, since we were talking about Jupiter, she's
Hmm.
actually the daughter of Jupiter, right?
Hmm.
But she doesn't have a mother. She was actually born out of Zeus's forehead, or Jupiter's forehead. It's like pulled out. So she is in a sense an aspect of Zeus, right, or
Mhm.
Jupiter. And she's about having the wisdom to recognize these patterns and these things, and like be able to use that wisdom to protect other people, because she's a protector, right? She protected Athens, right? And so for me, how that played out on my chart is where my north node is. So that's kind of like where my evolution is. And it's
Mhm.
about having compassion in the way I connect with people, because it's in my seventh house. So having compassion in the way I relate to and connect with people, and using that wisdom I've gained from my own experiences to help them in their journey, right?
Mhm.
And the fact that it's trine Chiron means that, my own healing, I can give that to the community. I can help them. I can nurture them in that way, right? And my Chiron is in the 11th house.
Oh,
So a lot of times I haven't felt very much a part of the community, especially because I do things so differently and I am autistic, right?
mhm.
But I have a lot to offer. I have a lot of wisdom to give. And that's kind of my destiny, right? Like with the North Node, that's for what I'm here to do. It's what I'm evolving in, growing into, right?
Mhm.
More and more. So. But
Yeah.
yeah, Palestine is great. I love all the asteroid goddesses. They really add just like this extra layer that's so rich.
Yes. Yes. When I first heard about Pallas Athena, I was like, oh, that's some aspects of my personality that I can relate to. And I really like, the fact that, Chiron is in the 11th for you, and basically, in a way, by building a community of your own, that you build a community and you take a part in a community, it can be very validating for people who could not did not think that they could be a part of a community, did not think that they can relate, did not think that they could be seen and understood, kind of listening to that voice, which I'm honored to to give a place to your voice, basically, so more people can see it, because I really believe in voicing our voice, in sharing ourselves in whichever way we can bring it to the world, and showing up, because that's how we can genuinely meet people and genuinely feel seen and genuinely connect, which
Yeah,
is a part, there are many views to astrology. There was a lot of spirit conversation. I think it was by Jake, I don't remember, about like where a lot of spirit is and how it coincides with what you do in astrology, which was a really interesting discourse. So mine's in Venus, in the Venus ruled sign in Taurus, and it's in the Venus Decan, and I definitely see how I see astrology as an art of relating and bringing people and things together. This may not be true for everyone. Um,
yeah. I
Definitely,
mean,
yeah.
well,
So,
there's a lot of ways to view and practice astrology, and they're all valid in their own way. They're just different ways of
mhm,
doing the same thing, just a different angle, and like seeing how it can be useful to us in whatever way we choose to utilize it. And
mhm,
I think we all have something to contribute. And I like, what you're saying about we all have a voice, and it's good to encourage and give each other space to speak.
mhm,
And, sometimes we have to, be brave and assert, what it is we need. And that only can happen if we speak, because otherwise we're not going to get what we need,
mhm,
because people can't read our minds. As much as I'm sure some of us wish we could read each other's minds, it's just not how it works. So it's so important to have a voice and
mhm,
speak on what we need, and to encourage that, and give other people the tools to too. And astrology can be that, because in a lot of senses, like, astrology is a language. It's the language of the universe. Like, when you understand it, you can understand your story and how things are unfolding in your journey through life, and you can see how they're unfolding collectively, or in a person that you're close to in your life, like your mom or your sister or your lover or whoever, right? Like, it just allows us to really be in touch with whatever the lessons we're needing to learn are, and what it is we need to focus our energy on. And I think that is especially important because too often in the world today, we're so goal oriented. It's like, I have to do this to get this, right? And it's like not honoring where you are in your own life or in your story. You're like trying to achieve something because it's what you think you need or like what
Yeah.
society expects of you, right? Rather than just honoring yourself and your truth and, you know, like really listening to the universe telling you like, hey, this is what you need, right? And so being able to hear that, to listen too, it's not just about speaking, it's about listening, right? And that's such an important skill to cultivate moving forward. So
Yeah, it begin listening, like loving. It begins with listening to ourselves, to our inner voice. Because I find with people who find it difficult to listen to another person, um, they're not sitting with themselves so well. Like they don't have themselves. And
yeah,
I think, growing into families and life circumstances where the voice was not heard, and maybe people grew into believing that there is no point to voice their voice, and even to the point that they don't know what they want. And I do run into that, and people who don't know what they like, don't know what's pleasurable for them, don't know what they need, and they kind of need this self-discovery journey that can be scary, because even to acknowledge that they don't know what they want, it can be scary.
yeah. And I mean, that's why it's so important to like really find our own truth. And, you know, I'm a big believer that everybody's got their own connection to spirit, to source, to, you know, this truth within us. And all too often we look outside ourselves for
Mm-hmm.
those answers, but they're already within us, and they're going to be more authentic and they're going to be more fulfilling when we find them within. And when you find them inside, then they're reflected on the outside. And it's part of that making space, right? You're making space for yourself. You're making space for what you need. And that's what I really encourage. I also I have a Zazen practice. I got really into Zen when I was younger, and that's been so helpful for me because it's about cultivating that presence with ourselves, right? And so I highly encourage, you know, finding some practice that does that. It doesn't have to be, you know, meditation. You know, that doesn't work for everybody. You know, there's so many different forms. It's just something that allows us to be present with ourselves, to really cultivate that connection with our truth, right? And, you know, then we can be much more in alignment with what we truly need. But until we make that space and stop looking outside for answers, we're going to be misguided, right?
This brings, this Zen thing really brought me to think, I think together with you, which I like it. I love it. Being with ourselves, also healing from, really, abuse or whatnot, or violence or something, because they don't come, people don't stay in abusive situations because they're drawn to the abuse so much. They can come to feel the dissonance emotionally of missing the highs and the adrenaline there, also with trauma from war, by the way. But there is a juxtaposition of the nourishing, the loving, the empowering, the beneficial, and the attachment, the attachment in the sixth sense of the word, the control, the violence, the abandonment, they come together. And a lot of healing from that has to do with holding a cognitive dissonance, or holding a paradox without going insane. That's like balancing the yin yang hemispheres of our brain. And that Zen like consciousness, it's, sitting with ourselves in essence, is sitting with the paradox, because there is a dynamic flow. And everybody who did meditation, or I'm beginning to do Xiu Dao, which is like a Taoist, it's not a meditation, but there's no Chinese word for meditation. But that is, you sit with yourself, and then you feel your body, and then you don't feel your body. And you go back, you feel your body, and then you don't feel your body. And you have to sort of be like a superposition of states and contain that, um, and practically enjoy that. Because that's what we are. We're connected and we're individuals. We're oneness and we're autonomous. You know, we want a community of individuals. And holding that is not an easy task. Like, I am humbled in every facet of the way, you know, from sexuality to society to economy to love to connection to the planets to astrology. You know, there is astrology of basically, you know, landing from the name of Brennan's book of fate and fortune.
Yeah.
And it's not just fate and fortune, it's that the ability to manage an inner state and the radical acceptance of inner state. So the ability to manage an inner state is actually derived from a radical acceptance of inner state. But it's not a complete radical acceptance of inner state, because there is a seed of growth within that radical acceptance. So I'm humbled by, but what it actually takes to be a healthy, thriving human being in this planet Earth, in this physical existence.
Yeah.
Cool.
I like that you brought up like radical acceptance, because a lot of what Zen is just to be present. And, you know, a lot of times we separate things in our minds, like our mind and body are separate, right? But our experiences are with them together, you know, they don't have to be separate. We separate things naturally. That's kind of like what, you know, the element of air does. It separates things, it makes distinctions, but they are distinct, but that doesn't mean they're separate. And so if we can sit with and be present and not, you know, form these attachments, then we're more able to fully be present and receive what is and perceive it, you know. And, you know, that's like the thing, is just to not make those attachments, just to be present with what is, rather than have these expectations or ideas, right? And just like let it reveal itself to you, rather than you try to, you know, juxtapose your like idea. Yeah, got a little tongue tied. But yeah, you know, like just to be present, you know, is such a powerful tool, and our whole world is set up to distract us or pull us out of presence. And so that's like why, if we have practices that allow us to be present, then we can, you know, be in that state more often, and, you know, bring that into other areas of our life. So when I'm not meditating, I can be more present, right? For instance.
Yes, absolutely. It's about the practice, you know, when we basically practice certain patterns of neural activity. Not only, I mean, just referring to matter. And when we cultivate these, you know, these practices, then they begin to operate in our day-to-day lives, which is what we keep exposing ourselves to. And I remember being in the academia, we had this, the researches around happiness, and one of the wonderful definitions that I heard for happiness is the ability to hold diverse emotions, diverse experiences at once. The ability to cultivate a couple of things at once. For example, you take parents that go through awful distress with growing children. It's just, but they consider themselves happy because they are able to contain the meaning of life and the torment of, you know, waking the children up, or having the children fighting and throwing things, or wounding each other or whatnot, and the sense of anxiety and danger, and they're able to contain it into a grand whole, in which, within this situation that you would think people would want to run away from as fast as they can, they report a sense of happiness and well-being. So no, of course, not at any given time, but there's a general feeling of satisfaction from their lives. So that comes up too. And
I mean, that's kind of going back to the paradox, right? Something that, you know, normally would not be aligned so much with happiness, but in relation to, like, you know, like the greater purpose of what that was, you're like, oh, my children are such a great source of happiness and joy in my life. Sure, they're challenging at times, but, you know, I love them. You know, like, I can't imagine my life without them, right? Like, whatever it is they say, right? So, and that's like the thing, like, too, like, we have to stop being so black and white. It's not like it's this or it's that. And that's like what I'm talking about with distinctions, you know. There's so much more there. And to just be present with it, you can see more fully what it is rather than trying to, you know, separate it or, you know, define it as radically different. You know, sometimes we just make distinctions for the sake of making distinctions rather than just, you know, really taking in what something is, like the essence of it, right? So
yeah, it's this brings to me to the point of having non-binary thinking, which is very strange for a person who does yin yang thing to say. But actually honing on the yin yang allows me to have non-binary thinking, because with the 0 and 1 I create complex structures. So I guess I'm more old-fashioned in this way, but having non-binary thinking in the sense of this is not black or white, it's black and white, and it has a color. But relaxing the focus, it's like relaxing the gaze. Because when you have a really penetrative, sharp, you know, Marcy gaze, then you see one point. You see one point. It's either black or white. That's the resolution you have. You relax the focus, you see more and more and more. And it is when you relax the focus that you can actually see the bigger picture and say, in essence, or as a grand whole, is this good for me?
yeah. It kind of reminds me of your metaphor of Virgo and Pisces.
Oh.
Virgo's just like, I see the details, I see, you know, the little things, all the imperfections, right? But then Pisces is like, I see the big picture, I don't see the details, the little things. But together, you know, when you can marry the details and the little things, and then also see the big picture, like see beyond, you know, the imperfections, so to speak, then you really get a sense of the essence of it. You know, you see that it's already perfect, right? But that's why I love opposites in astrology, because they're very much like that. You know, you're about going beyond the binary, like you said. Non-binary thinking is so important for our progression and, you know, a deeper understanding. Because if you're stuck in binary thinking, you're getting such a limited amount of knowledge or insight. You know, you're really limiting yourself, and, you know, we should want to go beyond our limits to really grow, right?
Yeah, it's a paradox that, you know, the very essence of thinking in binary terms is the drive to say, is it a yes or is it a no? But to actually decide whether it's yes or it's a no, you actually need to let go and relax the gaze. And then you feel it intuitive. It's like, that's that, or no.
Yeah.
But the look is not binary. The decision is. Part of the paradoxes of our life. It's so beautiful.
It's true. I mean, we don't have to exist. And who's to say I would be born or you would be born? Maybe somebody else could have been, you know? That's like the thing. And, you know, this life is a blessing, and we should make the most of it, and, you know, really try to understand more deeply what it is we're here to do, because we're here for some reason, but we have to discover what that is. So
that
we should embrace the journey.
Yeah, that brings me back to Jupiter and the path of joy. And the path of joy does not mean that we would not feel other feelings, but it is an understanding that we came to cultivate joy here. And it may come about in roundabout ways through feelings that are not always joyous, but in essence we are divinely guided to cultivate joy. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and in some ways, like, I think, you know, we have all these experiences for a reason, and, you know, I think a lot of joy comes out of suffering at times. You know, it's like going beyond the binary, right? The struggles and the hardships that Saturn, you know, gives me to learn from, allow me to find joy in a much greater sense when I have those Jupiterian experiences, right? So like they're interconnected, they're seemingly opposite, but like they're not as opposite as we think, you know, they're not so distinct, right? It's
Yeah,
just a different way.
because if I see a person, let's say, coming to me to the clinic with a Saturnian state, then I would basically try to see how do I create space for this person? How do I find the right oils, the right crystals that will ease him into letting love in and letting joy in, which is really to ease them into that, because it's not like, oh, take, you know, a happy pill, and they're not willing to take that because the body cannot take this change and transformation. It's a bodily thing. But in essence, the path is to sort of like redirect them into a place where they can let joy in. So I don't think we're necessarily meant to suffer here, or to even think as a healer that suffering is necessary, rather than to just accept the state that there is without thinking that it's necessary. That's what allows me to be a healer, I think. And I of course it affects the way I do astrology.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, I'm of the belief that we all suffer in certain ways. We don't have to suffer as much as we do.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, the nature of life is we have, you know, this whole infinite, you know, number of ways of having experiences, you know, and part of that is sometimes, you know, we're confronted with things that aren't joyful,
Mm-hmm.
which, you know, lead to suffering, and that's okay. We don't have to stay stuck there,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And maybe we are stuck there for a time, but that's just an opportunity or lesson to see what needs to be changed,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we're not stuck there. So, you know, in that journey, you know, we have all these, you know, experiences, and you can see, you know, with astrology, like why these things are coming up or where they're coming from in certain ways. But it's sort of up to us how we decide to work with those things. And it's kind of also brings me to like a thing I think is really important to speak on in astrology,
Mm-hmm.
that I don't believe that everything is completely fated. You know, we have choice and agency. The only
Mm-hmm.
thing that's determined is the past. We can't change that. That already happened. And we have the power to move towards the future we want, you know, in a limited sense. Like we can't do anything in our future, but that power is in the present. So if I learn from my past, you know, what's already happened, then I can change the patterns of behavior, you know, these experiences that I'm stuck in, right? So I can change my future. And you know, since I have a philosophy degree, this is a big question, you know, the free will versus determinism. But I'm a compatibilist. That, you know, they're not separate from one another.
Of course.
You know, some things are, you know, determined or fated. We can't change them. But there are other things that we have, you know, a lot of control over in our life, mainly ourselves and how we show up and express ourselves and our energy.
Yeah, this is the paradox of free will. And, you know, just to think, for example, you talk about volition. To move this hand up and down, I need volition, need to make a decision, an intent that's conscious to move it up and down. Otherwise, it's just and controlled. But to execute, I need a sense of determinism. That something goes from my brain to my hormones to my nervous system, and you know, contracts the muscles and relaxes the muscles in a way that is controlled. So there's a lot of determinism needed to exert free will. And there is the mechanism to access free will, and we talk about radical acceptance is one of the mechanisms to access free will. Zen-like state is another mechanism to access free will, and of course, knowing that there is fate and fortune. If I think about the difference between a lot of spirit to a lot of fortune, a lot of fortune is the fated things that are going to happen to you, and as far as I understood, maybe I'm redundant, yeah. A lot of spirit is the way you can deal with them. It's more about your internal resources, which are also faded, but it's more of like, what can you hone into?
Yeah.
So I'm a lot more inclined to learn about what can I hone into than some people want to know just what's going to happen to me, and they need that concrete thing, you know, how can I get ready and be stoic about that? But there's also that, okay, where can I be empowered?
Yeah.
What do I have? What volition do I have in here that I can exert?
One, I'm a big believer that that's always ourself. That's the only thing we have any control over, right? I can't control the world around me. I can't control the people around me. You know, I can choose how I interact with them, and maybe that, you know, moves me towards what I want, right? But that's not up to me. And that's why the focus on ourselves will ultimately bring us the most happiness, because, you know, if we're, you know, in control of ourselves and how we react or act in our life, then we'll be more aligned with what's good for us. But, you know, it's not always an easy thing, especially when you're trying to break patterns and cycles.
Yeah, especially when we seek control, because in essence, what the way to exert that sort of control is bringing in curiosity. And curiosity is not about control. Curiosity loves the mystery. It loves what we don't know that we don't know. It loves to know that there is still so much that we don't know. If I think about, you know, I'm doing Spirit of Matter also as taking charts of people who shaped our thinking, you know, scientists, cosmologists, public figures, artists, and kind of analyze their charts. And I look at the 9th, I look at the 12th. They tap into what we don't know. They tap into the 12th. What we don't know that we don't know, they bring into the 9. What we teach, what we learn, and they bring into the 10th and 11th or the 3rd. And I think sort of we don't know what's the meaning of all of this, but we're still curious. I think of, you know, for example, Richard Feynman, the physicist, Nobel Prize physicist, and he said the wonders of, he is not suffering in uncertainty. He thrives in it. That's what made him a great scientist. But for us, we want to know so much because we want control, and it is actually in bringing in curiosity that we grow. So much so that we can say, "Oh, I don't know the meaning of all of this." It's Feynman's words, and it doesn't matter. The beauty of all that there is, the beauty of the sense of discovery, that is the prize, and then that's interesting too.
Yeah, I definitely think curiosity and open mind is very important to our growth. But, you know, maybe in the paradox, we can be in control, but also embrace the mystery, right? Like, I can just be in control of how I react to what I learn and what I do with it, right? So, you know, there's a lot of ways to work with that, but I definitely, with my Pisces moon, love the mystery. And my Aquarian nature, I like to know things, but also like to know if I don't know something so I can learn about it. So, you know, there's a lot of ways to work with that, but it is important to kind of open yourself to that, because otherwise you're just going to stay stuck in like, this is what it is. And I mean, that's probably a lot of my approach to astrology is I wanted to figure out for myself. I didn't want somebody else's answers, right? I wanted to find my own. And it's made me very innovative in the way that I approach astrology and connect with others and the thoughts I share, because I'm really trying to look for something that resonates a little bit more deeply with my truth, because I had to find it myself, right? And that's what I'm encouraging in other people too. I think that's so important. Like if I say something, I don't want anyone to just take it for, you know, like as gospel, right? I want them to see like, does this match my experience? Like, is this true? Like, if I think about it, like, is this something that really resonates? And the thing about truth is, truth speaks for itself. If something is true, you'll be able to discover that it's true through reflecting, through thinking about it, through testing it, you know, like, and that's kind of the thing, you know. but that requires us to, look inside and really reflect to get to that point.
Right. Yeah, that's it immediately brings up it if it doesn't work with experiment, it's not, or it's false. But then it's up to us to decide what is the experiment. What do we consider true for us?
Yeah.
What's our methodology?
It's true, and it's hard when you talk about things that you can't reproduce with experiments.
Exactly.
Because like astrology is like one of those things. Like you can't be like, this means this, and this is exactly what happens, right? That'd be too easy. But in the field of astrology, you can reflect on your own personal experiences. Like, what was that transit like for me? Was it, connecting to anything in my natal chart? Like, oh yeah, like I remember I had this experience and the planets were there at that time, and like, well, yeah, that really tracks, right? And I was actually originally a chemistry major. Both my parents are scientists. And I was very logic minded, and like I didn't believe in astrology because I knew very limited like sun sign astrology. But then when I discovered my natal chart, like I was like, oh wait, like, and I was just like, this is just too reflective of my experience, so there must be something to it. And so that's how I came to know the truth of astrology, right? Through that own self-reflection on my experience. That was like the experiment, right? But it also requires an open mind. And I think that's like one thing I too definitely see in the scientific community is they're so dogmatic about their beliefs. It has to be, observable, reproducible, and like experiment, right? Like that's kind of like, how science said it. Right?
Simon had Mercury in Taurus in the 9th, and it was, I think, squared by Saturn in the 12th. So that thing that, of course, there were, I'm just thinking a fragment of the story of Simon, but yes, this kind of, I think a lot of scientists do have a lot of insight and dynamism to their intuition. Like a lot of them were channelers, and there used to be more times where one would be more open. The word God in Einstein's speech was mentioned. Gödel did his theorem, or the incompleteness theorem, and it looks like he had some sort of intention to prove that this shows that we cannot explain the world without God. And I've seen this too in, I don't remember his name. He wrote Can Physics Underlie the Mind? And I think Elliot something, I used him for my thesis proposal, and it's there, it's out there. And we begin to hear these voices more and more, but it does hold that contradiction, that Zen-like the state that we need.
I don't mean to say that there's not scientists out there like that. I'm just saying, by and large, there's, especially in more modern times, this like dogma around like things having to be proven empirically, but it's because we're looking at proving things physically, like with science, like we're understanding the laws of physics and like how you can reproduce or show these things, right? And so when you get to something that's metaphysical, like it just doesn't, align with that. And so there's a lot of people that brush it off in the scientific world. And I think that, is an error of thought, because they're not keeping an open mind. Of course, there are scientists that aren't like that. My mom is actually really into the metaphysics, and she's a biologist, right? So, but by and large, I've seen that in those spaces, and I hope more people move away from that. I know there are other people that are both scientists and into like astrology or other metaphysical things, right? And maybe it's just like okay to say that there are some things that we can't explain in physical and empirical terms, like in proof, right? But it doesn't mean that they're not true, right? And that's like an important distinction to make.
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't even, of course, astrology, one of the things, the reason I write on Twitter, scientist of the stars, I wouldn't say I'm either too qualified as an astrologer or as a scientist or a cosmologist, but I just put this word out there because I believe in the power and energy of words, and I want to bring signs of the stars back because
Yeah.
it is signs of the stars. And you know, that Venus unifying things, bringing it all together, connection-y thingy, relational, and language, yes, definitely language. My own Venus is in the Mercury decan, so it's and my Mercury is in the Venus decan, so definitely language. And when you said astrology is a language, I was like, yes, 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 absolutely, oh yes, totally yes. So that's one thing that came up, and then I lost my train of thought.
Well, I believe that astrology is both a science and an art.
I believe
There's a scientific side. Yeah, well, everything really is. But you know, the technical side of astrology, that's very scientific. You know, degrees, like, you know, the orbits of things, like, right, the way that they're connected, like in the sky and like in our experience, right? So there is a very scientific component of it. The art is understanding the synthesis, right? And how these things are all connected in the greater story that they're telling, because it's easy to look at one thing, right? But when you see how they're all woven together to form a complete picture, that's like an art, right?
Yeah.
And so it's important to embrace both those sides.
Absolutely. And I am humbled about, you know, we all say, oh, these people who are only spiritual with no sense of mind or logic are just dogmatic, or, you know, like fundamentalist or religious, or these people who are scientifically materialist, which is actually very grounding. I tapped into its energy. It's very grounding, and it was meant to ground people who could not be in emotional overwhelm, especially after the wars. But we say, you know, they're dogmatic, and in essence, I am humbled by what it takes to be a good scientist. Just because I'm actually going through that road of embodiment, of body mind science, of learning if a paradigms, how does it feel in my body, and how is it in my cognition, how is it in my intuition, and the biases that go along with that and that and that and that and that. And you know, and the very everyday living of astrology, it's like we need to do social media, we need to have our own businesses, we need to know our craft, we need to know how to relate to people. There's so much that goes into just being a, you know, a scientist of the stars, that I'm really humbled by that. Like,
Yeah.
I really am looking compassionately at people who are dogmatic. But
Yeah.
you know, I don't hang around with them so much because for self-care reasons, right? You can only talk to them so much if they invalidate you and cannot speak rationally.
Yeah, well, and I think, you know, sometimes it's just different strokes, right? People understand things in different ways because maybe they have Mercury's in different signs. So, you know, like, for instance, like, I just think about things differently. I also have Mercury in an earth sign. It's in Capricorn. So I'm very, like, matter of fact, like, is this useful, like, solid, very logical, right? And that's how I try to present things. But I also understand sometimes people think in terms of experience, like fire Mercury's, right? And that's okay. Everybody's got different ways of understanding things, right? And, you know, there's space for both of those things, and to, you know, understand that there's truth in both sides, right? And I think that's like the thing. Nobody's got the answer. Everybody has their answer, or what works for them. And we should, you know, be mindful of that. And, you know, I see a lot of times, especially in online spaces, like, there's like this idea of like, I have the answer, or I'm right, or, you know, this system's superior to this system, or whatever. And that's just not the case. Like, unless it's like, you know, just like totally off base, right? Like, just like totally like out there, like not grounded in anything, right? Because if it's grounded in something, there's truth in it. It's just, we don't always see that because that's just not our orientation, right? Of the way we think about or understand things. And that's okay. You know, there's got to be space for everyone.
Yeah, I think people find, you know, you talk about stuff like, let's take, you know, house placement, and that's another humbling argument, because you say, okay, according to Placidus, you know, my Scorpio would be in the 8th. According to whole sign, my Scorpio would be in the 9th. And the very understanding that, you know, there's tropical and sidereal and whatnot, that every system tells a story, and every story has a sense of value to it, is striking.
Yeah.
It's you know, it's not holding two things in contradiction. It's holding a couple of things in contradiction. It's a conglomerate of contradictions
Yeah.
to hold. So I can get why people become stagnant, and they're like, no, I'm not willing to open. This system works and this is better. And you know, how can it be that both Placidus is valid and tropical and the whole sign is valid? How can it be that both sidereal is valid and tropical is valid? It's not the same sign, you know? I can get that.
Yeah, and for me, they're just different perspectives. If I look at something from this perspective versus this perspective over here, we're both looking at the same thing. We're just looking at it in different ways. And it doesn't make it false. It just means we're perceiving things differently, right? And, you know, I think that there needs to be more of that kind of mindset brought into the way we approach things. Because sometimes people, especially in online spaces, can be very negative or lash out towards each other because they have different ideas. And, you know, it also encourages these echo chambers, or this like almost like monoculture of like astrology ideas. Like traditional astrologers are like, yes, this is the way, versus you have like modern astrologers, or, you know, tropical and sidereal, like, no, we have the answer. It's like, well, maybe everybody's got the answer and they're just seeing it differently. And there's space for all of us, right? And the more we make space for each other, the more we can come together and share ideas and teach each other more, and, you know, expand and grow. And, you know, I think this extends beyond astrology and, you know, the spiritual community in general. You know, there's so many things that we could, you know, really benefit in having more understanding for one another. And that's really what's going to make the world a better place, to be honest, is having that understanding. So
yeah, it's like how much can we hold as truth?
hold space for one another.
Yeah, like how much can we hold as truth?
Yeah, but I'm thankful that my Mercury is actually trying my Jupiter perfectly. So I think it makes me
a lot of holding of truth. It's a lot of truth to hold.
Yeah, it makes it a lot easier for me to open my mind to things. And it also is why I think I'm really here to be a teacher, because my Mercury is in the 6th house and my Jupiter is in the 10th house. So I have, you know, very expansive ideas to help people grow and see things in a new way. And, you know, through teaching, that's how I think I achieve those things. And that's what I feel really called to, especially with astrology, right?
Yes. So in your, let's say, your paid services, do you do more courses or more reading? Like if people want to reach you?
Yeah, so I mainly right now I offer readings. I'm working on some workshops and classes. I have one that I think will be very exciting that I'm planning for September, which is a locational astrology workshop, which I think is like a very useful tool, because locational astrology is just so useful. Like, you know, how does this location impact me, or what is my experience here, and like, how does this work? You know, like that is such a useful tool, because when we're looking at astrology, we're looking at both time and space, right? So like how those intersect and like how that plays out for us is so important, and what happens when I go to a new space, right? So I think that'll be a really exciting one. I'm working on like a more general like course series to just kind of dive in a little bit deeper to, you know, understand the basics and how they fit together, and, you know, just have a deeper, more enriching experience. And that would probably be like more towards like the winter. But I'm working on designing those courses. But I do a ton of different readings. I do locational astrology. That's definitely one of my strengths. You know, evolutionary astrology, obviously, but I, you know, do natal. I do every kind of return chart besides ones that don't return, like Pluto. Or maybe I could do America's Pluto return. That'd be a fun one.
Oh,
But
wow.
return,
Wow. Yeah.
yeah, return charts though are really useful, especially lower returns. But there's a lot of underutilized return charts. Like sometimes I think a Venus return, for instance, is really useful. Like when people are like having questions about what's coming up in terms of relationships, resources, you know, things like that. Like, and you know, it's about a year long. You know, so it's good for that year to understand those themes. Lunar returns are great. Like, what is, you know, it that I need from month to month to nurture and care for myself? Like, what's really going to help me, you know? And we talked about how that care for ourselves is so important, right? So those can be very useful. I love doing progression charts. It's not one that people go for as much because it's really a macro view of our evolution through time. But as an evolutionary astrologer, I think they're very useful to understanding, you know, that like arc of our evolution as a person, right? But sometimes people aren't so keen on seeing that macro evolution. They just want to know about the more immediate, which is why I like return charts, as they're very much important for understanding that. I love doing Saturn return charts actually, because those are so important. And those are actually, you know, kind of telling us the story of one age of our life and then how we transition to the next and the story in that next stage of our life, right? And I love Saturn too. I could talk about Saturn all day because I have a very Saturnian influence in my chart, so I'm very much in tune with that. Then I do synastry too. So, you know, a lot of that kind of stuff. And I want to do more family, like kind of astrology counseling, but it just depends. I haven't really had a lot of families working with me, but I definitely have the tools and the ability to do that. So.
I know with family you do composites, right?
Yeah, I like doing synastry too, to like understand the individual dynamics. Because with composites, you know, yeah, you can do that when there's a lot of people and it's a little simpler. But I really like seeing the interactions between people because that really allows people to understand how to interact in a way that's more mutually supportive of one another, right? Rather than like just like what's the general experience of you know the family, right?
This is important.
It's a little,
yeah,
and it's a little, a little more work.
Like when you do, for example, you know, this is important for people who may want to go to you as families, to know that you give that extra mile of actually going through the one-to-one relations, while another astrologer would say, oh, let's do a composite for the family and then look at the natal charts and whatnot. But you actually go through the whole thing.
Yes, and I think that's so important. I have a Taurus midheaven, so for me, everything's about quality. I don't care if it takes longer, if it takes more time, I want to do a good job. And I want to do a good job because I want to help people. That's what I'm here to do. And that's what I'm using my gifts for, right? Because if I want to make the world a better place, I have to be about it. I have to do that, you know. And, you know, if people are supporting me, I have to give that in return, right? Which is to show up fully, right? And I already talked about the locational, but I do different types of locational. I do the astrocartography and the relocation charts. Sometimes I do a combo if somebody's thinking about like, where should I move? Like astrocartography is really cool because it's like the broad strokes of like how a certain place influences. So it can give us some ideas on where to move or where would be a good place to travel, right? And then relocation charts are like, what is my actual experience? Like the details of like what it's like to live here for me and what will it bring up in my life, right? And that's like a very useful tool. I think that's like really helpful for a lot of people. But yeah, those are my services, and I'm working on expanding things more and more. So.
This is amazing. I want to thank you so much. And I will put in the comments below your website and your details where people can contact you and get a reading from you and really get this experience of, you know, being empowered through the reading. So I guess every person who is looking for practical tools to be empowered in life, that or more joyous in life, that would be you would be the go-to person for that.
Yeah, Yeah, definitely. As a Leo rising, I feel like a lot of what I do is inspire, right? I'm here to inspire and to empower. And some people have told me I'm kind of like a life coach in a sense, which I can understand that, but I'm really here to show people the light they have inside. I found my light, and I want to show people that they have that inside themselves too, but in their own way. And astrology is just that vessel for me, that tool. And I love giving people those tools to empower them. And what really is the most meaningful thing to me is when people come back to me later and they're like, oh man, that reading was so spot on, or was so helpful, or whatever it was. And I'm like, awesome, that's like why I do it. I want to first and foremost help people, and I'm so thankful that I can do that and be supportive in return.
This is so amazing. This is so amazing because Leo is really it's just a light and shining the light on the lives of people, basically.
Totally. And that's, my sun's right on the descendant in my chart. So it's like very much like that energy. I connect with people. I like to bring that sun energy into things. So
wow, yeah, this really is. Absolutely. So thank you so much for taking the time to share your knowledge, your wealth of knowledge on both, the mundane, the evolutionary, all the things we went through here, and practical tools and beyond astrology. It was so interesting for me, and I'm sure for our viewers too. So we'll put the details of Chad right below in the comments below, and in your website where people can contact you. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was really lovely to talk with you. I had a great conversation with you, and I hope everybody else enjoys it. And I'm glad that I have a chance to connect with more people. So thank you for using your platform to help me reach more people.
Thank you. Yeah, it is. That's a part of what I do here in Spirit of Matter. And if you are also an astrologer watching this and looking for a place where you can, voice your voice, or if you're kind of feeling anxious about don't know if you want to do it, I hope you kind of be encouraged to do it, and you can DM me and we can find this place, find what you want to talk about, and kind of bring it to life and create this community, this in-between stage of between conferences and like higher castes that you need to go through a certain path to go there. I want to create that in-between stage, because there's so much to share, and there's so much knowledge to share, and there's so many voices to be heard, that I love giving the place for that. And I'm growing. I feel like a little conference in my room. So it's so enjoyable.
Yeah, well, that's where the real work is for you right now, and the power of Pluto being in your 11th house, creating that community, right, to collaborate and work together to do something meaningful. So thank you for creating this structure for not just myself, but other people.
Wow, that's so true. I didn't even think about Pluto in my 11th, because I switched from Placidus to whole sign, and I'm like, oh, right, Pluto is in my 11th. Pisces rising. True.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen your chart, but just based on what you were telling me.
Yeah, like, oh, yes. It's like there is in Hebrew, there is a saying that the shoemaker walks barefoot. So I look at other people's charts, a scientist chart, this chart, that chart. And in the beginning of astrology, you go through everything is like, oh, how is it in my chart? And now it's like, oh, Feynman had this. Oh, this person had that. Oh, my client had that. Oh, my best friend had that. Oh, this person that I watch had that. And I'm like, oh, I have my 11th house. I didn't think about it.
You stop looking at your chart as much, like after you've done it so many years, because you're looking at everyone else's chart. I get that. I'm actually thankful that Mars and Venus actually just went into my first house like a couple of days before we did this interview. Because man, when the 12th house transits, I'm just like, it's like
with Mars,
I need to rest. Yeah.
Nightmares.
But yeah, well, now Mars is my first house. It's time to create things. So now I feel like I've been dreaming up the courses I want to create, And now that I'm like got this energy, I'm like, okay, let's do it. Like I made space to create them now. I've like kind of fleshed them out in my dreams. Now it's time to like actually do it.
Oh, I'm glad that this is your dreams that you had in the 12th. Oh. Because I have other dreams in the 12th and Mars is there. But that's
I mean, Venus was there too, so it made it a little nicer.
yeah.
You know.
Mars did not ravish Venus totally. So we
Yeah,
got
well, I mean, Leah is also fun and playful. We're like, hey.
Yeah, and you know, it is your first house. It's where you shine. You get Mars there, it's kind of like go, go, go.
Yeah, I mean, it's also can be self-conflict too, though. I think of Ernest Hemingway as a really good example, like because he actually killed himself when Mars transited onto his ascendant.
Oh.
Like that's like, yeah.
So I mean, with Leo ascendant, do you know that it takes more than one transit to kill you? You really need a lot of them.
No, it's an extreme example.
Yeah,
it's an extreme example, right? But you know, time of violence towards ourselves too. So it's good to be mindful, right, of how we're showing up. Like, don't be hard on yourself. Don't be mindful. Just be like, well, what do I want, and go for it, right?
Mars is like the knife, so I'd say cut what no longer serves you in life. Don't cut yourself if you can.
Yeah, exactly. Cut out the things from your life that aren't serving you, rather than cutting out a part of yourself.
Okay, yes, trigger cutting. And here we have another episode with a trigger warning.
You can cut that part out if you want, but
no, I don't think I have a way to edit that. But no, it's okay. We'll just write trigger warning in the end. It's not a problem. So yeah, that could probably last on and on and on. But thank you so much for being here. And
yeah, thanks again for having me.
And yeah, I'll see you in my next Spirit of Matter episode.
Yeah.
You can subscribe to this channel if you like what you see, and press the like if you like what you see, because that's good for the algorithm. And voice your voice. Tell us your thoughts. If you have any questions to Chad or to me, what's your take from this conversation? What are your experiences relative to what we talk about? What do you think about this whole Jupiter in evolutionary astrology and the whole approach to astrology as something where you empower yourself within? How do you do astrology? Let us know in the comments and share with the astrological community so we can grow together and form a community together. And I'll see you in my next episode. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Wait, no.